So maybe all of us, definitely you who are parents, have had the wonderful experience of seeing a newly born baby. And from my perspective, from some experience with that, what I've seen is that one of the things that seems like it always happens is that members of the family and friends look very closely at the features of the baby, and they try to see who the baby looks like or takes after. So you've heard it, I've heard things like, he's got his father's forehead and hair, or she's got her mother's eyes and complexion. And they're really wonderful, warm statements when you think about it. And what's underneath that, it's pretty clear. What's underneath it is that we like to see family members, and especially parents, and even grandparents, kind of like to see them in the physical features of a new baby. Well, maybe we never thought about this, but Jesus gets us caught up in a similar thing with God. And here's what I mean. I think most people, probably throughout history, have wondered, what is God like? And if we just look back, over the centuries, artists have depicted God in lots of ways. I think this has been a classic way. Some artists have depicted God as kind of this grandfatherly old man with a gray beard, Some have gone like in a very different direction and have depicted God simply as just a brilliant light, just a beaming light, brighter than any light we've ever seen. Well, all those images of God are important. They're all important because they have consequences on us as persons, consequences on how we relate to God, and then in turn, how we relate to one another. So I'm thinking, if we've got this like a dominant image of God as tough, punishing, even vindictive, we can see that in some of the Old Testament writings. Well, that can lead us to be rather unfeeling, lacking in empathy for one another. Or our primary image of God could be as a judge. And that can lead us to kind of feel distant from God, afraid of God, and maybe inappropriately guilty about things. So my point is that what we think God looks like and how we image God, very important, because it's got consequences on who we become as persons and on how we relate to God and to one another. It's important. So, in that gospel today, that's really the agenda. Philip asks Jesus, show us the Father. He wants to know what God is like. And Jesus says, Philip, those who've seen me have seen the Father. I'm in the Father. The Father is in me. So it's like Jesus is saying that he's a transparent piece of glass. And we look through it and we can see God very clearly. Right through that, right through Jesus. He's the full, accurate self-disclosure of God, the accurate picture of God. So, what that means is that in Jesus' thoughts, feelings, looking at a little baby and seeing parents or grandparents and the physical features of that baby. So we look at Jesus and we see the Father, we see God himself. So for example, we hear Jesus saying, you remember this at one point, he says, okay, let those without sin throw the first stone. Well, from that, we know that God is understanding and patient with our humanity and our failings. We see Jesus mingling, hanging out with some people who are perceived as unethical and sinful. Well, from that we know that God is outreaching and amazingly inclusive. We see Jesus saying, let the children come to me. And from that we know that God highly values the life of those who are vulnerable. From an unborn child, to a disabled person, to a frail elderly person. And one more. We hear Jesus say, you've heard it, whatever you do to the least of my brothers and sisters, that you do to me. And from that we know that God is especially compassionate to those who are in need. Like families that can't pay both the food bill and the electric bill. Or maybe like today, refugees, or like minorities. So the point, by looking at Jesus' thoughts, feelings, words, actions, we get a really good idea of what God is like. We get it. And those images of God that Jesus gives us have big consequences on who we become as persons, and then on how we relate, both to God and to each other. That's how I see it.